The stagecoach rattled into the valley just as the sun slid low, washing the fields in amber light. Eli stood by the fence, hat clutched in one hand, the other resting on the worn wood rail. He was small even among men, no more than 150 centimeters tall, lean from years of labor. He had spent half his life hearing the whispers, too little for the land, too small for a wife. Yet he had written the letter anyway, carved the words slow and careful, hoping someone out there would read past his size and see the man. Dust billowed as the coach drew to a halt. The driver clambered down, swung open the door, and a figure stepped into the light. She filled the doorway at once. Tall, taller than any woman Eli had ever seen, near 2 meters, with long legs carrying her down the wooden step, as if she were made for grander places than this lonely farmstead. Her dress was pale blue, catching the gold of the setting sun, the fabric moving like water against her frame. Hair the color of wheat tumbled down her back, loose from the long ride, framing a face that seemed almost too fine for this raw frontier. For a heartbeat, the yard fell silent. Even the horses shifted uncertainly, as if sensing something unusual. Eli's chest tightened. He had expected a modest woman, plain and practical, the kind who would fit without fuss into the quiet rhythms of ranch life. Instead, here stood someone who seemed carved from another world. Her eyes found his, not with judgment, not with pity, but with calm curiosity. The contrast between them was stark. His slight frame, his hands rough with work, his boots worn through, her height, her grace, the effortless way she seemed to command the air around her. The driver cleared his throat, muttered about luggage, but Eli barely heard. His heart hammered with a mix of dread and wonder. He thought of the ring he had carved from oak, tucked safe in his pocket. In his mind it looked suddenly too small, almost laughable. The woman stepped closer, her shadow stretching long across the dirt. She paused before him, the difference in height almost comical, yet her expression softened. She held out her hand, not to tower, not to mock, but to greet. "Mr. Eli?" Her voice was low, musical, carrying a trace of weariness from the miles traveled. He swallowed hard, managed a nod. His voice failed him, but he took her hand. Her fingers were slender, cool from the evening air, and she held him steady in a way he hadn't expected. For the first time in years, the small rancher felt something other than the weight of ridicule. He felt seen. The stagecoach rattled off, leaving only dust in its wake. The valley stretched wide and silent around them. She looked toward the cabin, then back at him, waiting. Eli drew a breath. Whatever this was, whatever the neighbors would whisper when they saw them together, it had begun. The cabin smelled faintly of wood smoke and bread. Eli had prepared what little he could manage, a pot of beans, a loaf cooled from the morning, and a jug of water drawn from the well. It was a humble table, nothing to impress, yet he had polished the tin plates until they gleamed in the lamplight. She ducked slightly to step through the doorframe, though the cabin itself was not small. Her height seemed to shrink the room, yet she moved with an ease that made the walls feel less confining. She set her single trunk near the corner and glanced around with eyes that took in everything. The patched roof, the swept floor, the shelf with 3 well-worn books. Eli felt himself shrink further under that gaze, though she said nothing unkind. He pulled out a chair, and she lowered herself gracefully, her frame dwarfing the simple furniture. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sounds were the hiss of the fire and the steady tick of rain starting against the roof. He placed the food between them, his hands rough against the polished plates. She smiled faintly, a gesture small but genuine, and it eased the tightness in his chest. You live alone, she said softly, her accent only faint, but there. He nodded. Since my father passed, the land's quiet. Too quiet sometimes. His voice faltered, and he busied himself with slicing bread. She accepted a piece, her fingers delicate despite their length. When she tasted it, her smile deepened just enough for him to notice. It's good. No one had ever praised his bread before. He felt heat rise in his face, though not from the fire. The lamplight flickered across her profile. Smooth cheek, pale skin flushed from the ride, lips pressed in thought. She was not muscled like the farm women he'd known, nor hardened by the sun. Instead, she seemed touched by something different, a refinement that did not belong in this rugged valley. And yet she did not look displeased. She ate slowly, with care, and when she lifted her gaze to him again, it held no pity, only calm. Eli struggled with words. He wanted to ask why she had answered his letter, why she had chosen a man like him. But his tongue felt heavy, and instead he filled her cup with water. She accepted it with a nod, and for a moment, silence became comfortable. Outside, the rain thickened, drumming steady on the roof. Inside, two strangers sat across a table, bound not yet by love, but by a choice they had both made. When she finally spoke again, her voice was low, almost thoughtful. It feels peaceful here. Eli swallowed hard. For the first time, he believed maybe it could be. The rain cleared by morning, leaving the ground damp and the sky pale as polished bone. Eli hitched his mule to the wagon, preparing for the short ride into town. Supplies had run low, and he could not put it off any longer. He half hoped she would prefer to stay behind at the cabin, unseen. But when she stepped out onto the porch in her simple blue dress, hair tied back neat, he knew she intended to come. The road into town was quiet, just the creak of wheels and the steady plod of hooves. Eli kept his eyes forward, heart hammering with the thought of what waited ahead. He had never cared for crowds, not with his sighs drawing glances and whispers. Today, with her beside him, the stares would multiply. And they did. The wagon rattled into the square, and heads turned as if pulled by the same invisible thread. Men paused mid-step, women lowered their voices, children craned their necks to see. Eli kept his jaw tight, hands fixed on the reins. He felt her calm presence beside him, tall and serene, her gaze steady ahead as though the eyes of a dozen strangers meant nothing. Mrs. Keene from the general store was the first to speak. Her voice carried too far as she nudged her husband. Lord above, look at the size of her, like a willow tree beside a sapling. Laughter rippled from a group of men by the blacksmith's forge. Eli's ears burned. He wanted to shrink into the wagon seat, vanish into the wood. But before shame could root too deep, he felt her hand brush his arm. Light, deliberate. He risked a glance. She was looking not at the crowd, but at him. The faintest smile touched her lips, calm and sure, and in that moment the whispers seemed to fade. Inside the store, the hush followed them. She moved through the narrow aisles with quiet grace, her head nearly grazing the beams. Eli busied himself with flour and salt, but his eyes strayed to her as she studied a bolt of cloth, fingertips running across the weave. She looked not embarrassed, not uneasy, only thoughtful. At the counter, Samuel Keene cleared his throat. New help on the ranch, Eli? His tone tried for casual, but dripped curiosity. Eli's jaw tightened. Before he could answer, she spoke, her voice even and steady. No, not help. A wife. The words struck harder than a hammer blow. The store went still. Samuel blinked, then busied himself with weighing the flour. Eli felt the world tilt, the truth of it spoken aloud for the first time. When they left, the whispers resumed, but quieter now, less certain. The wagon rolled back toward the valley. Eli stared at the reins, his chest heavy with dread and something sharper, almost like pride. She sat straight beside him, calm against the sky. Her hand rested again on his arm, and though she said nothing, the gesture told him more than words could. Whatever the valley thought, she had chosen her place. And for the first time, Eli dared believe he might not have to stand alone. By midsummer, the grass stood waist-high and the air shimmered with heat. Eli rose before dawn to check the pasture, only to find trouble waiting. His prize bull had broken through the fence in the night and now stood loose in the field, snorting and pawing the ground. The beast was nearly a ton of stubborn muscle, and Eli's heart sank at the sight. He ran for a rope, his legs short but quick, though he knew deep down he had little chance of handling the animal on his own. The bull had thrown him before, sent him sprawling like a rag doll. Alone, he could do little more than wave and hope it moved back toward the pen. Behind him, the door of the cabin creaked. She stepped out into the morning light, tall and straight, her blue dress brushing the grass. Her hair caught the sunrise, glowing pale gold, and her gaze swept the field before settling on the bull. Calm, steady, without fear. "You'll get hurt," Eli warned, though his voice cracked under the weight of both worry and shame. He felt small enough already without her seeing him tossed aside like a child's doll. She didn't answer. Instead, she lifted her skirts just enough to walk free and began striding toward the animal. Each step was slow, deliberate, her hands loose at her sides. The bull turned, massive head lowered, steam puffing from its nostrils. For a breathless moment, Eli thought it would charge. But she kept moving, her height giving her presence like no other. Her voice carried then, low and even, words meant not for Eli but for the beast, a sound more rhythm than language. The bull's ears twitched, its pawing slowed. Eli stood frozen by the broken fence, rope dangling useless from his hand as he watched her close the distance. When she reached the bull, she extended one pale hand, palm open, patient. The bull snorted again, then swung its head closer. She laid her hand against the thick neck, fingers pressing gently just behind the ear. The change was instant. The bull's tense body sagged, its great head lowering as if surrendering to her touch. She stroked the animal with slow, confident movements, speaking softly all the while. Then, with a deftness Eli could hardly believe, she looped the rope around its neck, tied it firm, and began leading it back toward the pasture. The beast followed her like a docile ox. Eli's throat tightened. Relief flooded him, but so did something sharper, something close to awe. She had done in minutes what he had failed to do in months, not with force, not with fear, but with calm and sure presence. When the bull was safely inside the fence again, she secured the gate and brushed her hands together. Her eyes met Eli's across the field. No pride, no boasting, only a quiet steadiness, as if what she had done was the most natural thing in the world. Eli swallowed hard and looked down at his boots. He had never felt smaller, yet never more grateful. That morning, under the wide sky, he understood. Strength came in forms he had never expected. Market day drew people from every corner of the valley. Wagons rattled into town, stalls overflowed with jars of honey, bolts of cloth, smoked meat, and tin tools stacked high. Eli had always dreaded these trips, where his size drew quiet smirks and sidelong stares. Today, with her walking at his side, the weight of every eye seemed doubled. She moved through the street with a poise that belonged more to a ballroom than a frontier town. Nearly 2 meters tall, her presence rose above the crowd, her pale hair catching the sun like a beacon. Eli, half her height, kept to her side with shoulders tight, wishing for invisibility. The whispers began quickly. "Lord, she's taller than Mason's barn door." "Is that his wife? Can't be." "Poor fellow looks like her child beside her." Laughter drifted like dust. Eli's ears burned, his hands clenched white at his sides. He had known this would come. What he hadn't known was how much it would sting to hear his marriage reduced to spectacle. She heard it too. He saw the way her eyes flicked toward the murmurs, then back to him. But her face stayed calm, unshaken. She slowed her stride until it matched his, refusing to let him trail behind. When the laughter rose louder near the blacksmith's stall, she slipped her hand through the crook of his arm. The street went still. Her gesture was simple, quiet, but it carried more weight than any words. Heads turned, whispers died on lips. Eli felt her warmth against him, steady, deliberate. She was not hiding him, not protecting him like a child, but walking beside him as though he were enough. Inside the mercantile, Samuel Keene raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Eli gathered flour and nails with fumbling hands. She chose fabric, pale linen, simple but fine, and laid it on the counter. "For curtains," she said softly, her voice clear enough for the room to hear. Eli looked at her then, startled. Curtains were not necessity, not survival, but comfort. Home. The thought of her imagining such things for his cabin made his chest tighten. On their way out, a group of men lingered by the trough, grins sharp as knives. One spoke low but not low enough. "Wonder how a man that small keeps a woman like that." The laughter that followed was cruel. Eli stiffened, his stomach dropping. Before he could speak or flee, she stopped. Turning, she fixed the men with a gaze that did not waver. Not anger, not fire, but something stronger. Unflinching dignity. The laughter faltered, then died, as if under the weight of their own shame. Without a word, she guided Eli forward, her hand still linked with his. By the time they reached the wagon, his chest no longer ached with humiliation. It ached with something else. Something like pride, borrowed from her but settling deep into him. For the first time in town, Eli felt taller. The evening fell warm and restless. Crickets sang from the tall grass, and the air smelled of pine sap and smoke. Eli sat by the hearth, mending a strap with clumsy stitches, while she moved about the cabin in quiet rhythm, closing shutters, setting aside the dishes, folding the pale cloth she had bought in town. The room seemed different already, softer, touched by her hand. She finally settled near the fire, long legs folded with grace, her frame so tall that even seated she seemed to tower above him. The lamplight traced the pale line of her cheek, the curve of her mouth, the glint of her hair where it caught the flame. Silence stretched between them, not heavy, but uncertain. Eli shifted, needle slipping from his fingers. He cleared his throat, words tangling before they reached his tongue. At last, he managed. "You didn't have to speak up in town." Her gaze lifted, calm and steady. "I didn't speak," she said softly. "I only stood with you." The simplicity of it struck him harder than any defense could have. His chest tightened, and for a moment he had to look away. The fire cracked, filling the quiet. "I'm not what men here expect," Eli said at last, the confession low. "Never was. They look at me and see less." His fingers worried the strap, leather creaking under his touch. "I thought a wife might ease it, but now they only stare harder." Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture softened. She leaned closer, the faint scent of soap and smoke rising from her dress. "And what do you see, Eli?" He blinked, surprised. "About what?" "About yourself." The question hung in the room like smoke. He searched for an answer but found only silence. She reached for the strap in his hands, her fingers brushing his, slender, warm. She examined his stitching with quiet interest. "These are steady hands, work-worn, careful. They build, they mend, they plant." She set the strap down gently and met his gaze again. "That is more than most men here can claim." Eli's throat closed. Her words were plain, yet they carried a weight that pressed past his doubts. The fire popped, and shadows swayed across the walls. She leaned back slightly, her long frame folding into the chair. "You measure yourself against height, against size, but the land does not care how tall you are, nor do I." The quiet that followed was not uncertain now. It was full, alive, humming with something unnamed. Eli felt it in the stillness of her hands, the calm in her eyes, the way her presence filled the room without pressing him smaller. For the first time, he wondered if her arrival was not a mistake after all. The storm came sudden, rolling over the valley with a growl that shook the windows. Eli had just finished tying down the barn doors when the first sheets of rain came slashing sideways, driven by a wind that bent the trees low. He sprinted for the cabin, his small frame swallowed by the roar of thunder, boots sinking in mud before he stumbled through the doorway. Inside, she was already at the hearth, steady and composed, though the cabin rattled with each gust. The lamplight flickered across her tall figure as she shut the shutters tight, her movements firm and precise. Eli stood dripping near the door, chest heaving, watching her move as if the storm outside could not touch her. The wind howled, the roof groaned. A crash sounded from the barn, sharp and violent. Eli's heart lurched. He knew the sound too well. "The calf," he gasped. "If the stall broke—" He reached for his coat again, but she was faster. "Wait," her voice cut through the thunder. She crossed the room in 2 strides, her hand on his shoulder. Strong but gentle. "You'll be swept under out there." "I can't leave it," Eli said, voice tight. His whole body trembled, not from fear of rain or wind, but from the thought of losing the one creature born on his land, fragile and new. Her eyes searched his, calm in the flicker of firelight. Then she nodded once, a decision firm as stone. "We'll go together." Moments later they plunged into the storm, the night tearing at them with rain like knives. She moved first, her height cutting a path through the sheets of water, Eli half running to keep pace at her side. The barn loomed ahead, its doors banging loose, one hinge already twisted free. Inside, chaos reigned. The bull stomped nervously in its pen, the horses snorted and kicked. The small calf bleated weakly, trapped beneath a beam that had fallen when the wind split the roof. Eli dropped to his knees at once, mud soaking his trousers, straining with both arms against the beam. It barely budged. His breath came in ragged gasps. Then she was beside him, her hands joining his. Taller, stronger, yet careful. She heaved in rhythm with him, her muscles taut under soaked sleeves. Together, with a final groan, the beam shifted just enough for the calf to scramble free. The little creature staggered upright, trembling but alive. Eli collapsed back, breathless, rain pouring down his face. She crouched beside him, her hair plastered to her cheek, her chest rising hard with effort. For a moment, neither spoke, the storm raging around them. Then Eli laughed, a short, cracked sound. Relief more than joy. She turned, and despite the storm, despite the mud, a smile curved her lips, a smile that lit the darkness brighter than the lightning. The calf pressed against Eli's side, small and shivering. He stroked its damp hide, his hand steady now. He looked up at her, towering over him even crouched low, and saw something shift in her gaze. Respect. Recognition. And for the first time, he realized she did not see him as less. She saw him as hers. By morning, the storm had spent itself. The valley lay washed clean, fields glistening, fences sagging but standing. Mist clung low to the ground, curling like breath over the damp earth. Eli stepped out of the cabin, his body aching from the long night, and drew in the sharp, fresh air. She was already outside, sleeves rolled back, hair loose and damp, tending the animals with calm precision. She moved easily among them, tall and graceful, her hands steady as she checked each stall. The calf they had saved pressed close to its mother, alive and strong. Eli watched from the doorway, a knot tightening in his chest. Gratitude, yes, but also something more, something deeper that left his throat dry. She turned and caught him staring. For a moment, he thought to look away, to hide. But her expression held no mockery, no question. Only a quiet warmth that seemed to fold the distance between them. They spent the morning repairing the barn, side by side. She held the beams steady while he hammered nails, her strength and his care meeting in quiet rhythm. No words were needed, each action flowing into the next until the work was done. When they stepped back, mud still clinging to their boots, the barn stood firm again. Later, they sat on the porch, the sun breaking through at last. Birds sang in the dripping branches. Eli sipped water from a tin cup, his shoulders heavy but loose. She sat beside him, her long frame relaxed, hands folded in her lap. "You could have left last night," he said at last, his voice rough. "Could have let me struggle alone. Most would have." Her gaze moved to him, steady as always. "Why would I leave?" He searched for an answer but found none. Only silence stretched, filled by the soft drip of water from the roof. At length, she added, her tone softer still. "You think yourself small, Eli, but I see how you face the land, how you care for what's yours. That is not small." The words struck deeper than he expected. His fingers tightened around the tin cup. He wanted to answer, but his voice betrayed him. So he only nodded, once. Firm. The sun climbed higher, warming the boards beneath their feet. They sat without speaking. Yet the silence was no longer heavy. It was shared, gentle, like the valley itself breathing after the storm. In that quiet, Eli felt a change. Not sudden, not loud, but steady. The beginning of something new. The settlement held its summer gathering in late July, when the heat eased and neighbors came together for trade, music, and talk. Eli had never liked the gatherings. Crowds made him uneasy, and eyes always found him. But she suggested they go, and something in her tone made refusal impossible. The hall was strung with lanterns, their glow spilling across rough-hewn beams. Music drifted from a fiddle, quick and warm, joined by the beat of boots on the plank floor. Couples spun and laughed, skirts twirling, hands clapping in time. Eli lingered at the edge, half in shadow, clutching a tin cup of cider. He watched her among the crowd, tall, graceful, pale hair gleaming in the lantern light. Heads turned wherever she moved. Some gawked, some whispered, but none could ignore her. A few men tried to draw her into the dance, their grins bold. She shook her head politely, steady as a stone, until her eyes found Eli in the corner. For a moment, she only looked. Then she crossed the floor, her dress brushing the boards, and stopped in front of him. "Will you dance?" The words froze him. He wanted to say no. His feet were clumsy, his body too small. The idea of them on the floor together, the stares, the whispers, made his stomach twist. But she stood waiting, patient, her hand open. Eli set down his cup. His palm slid into hers, small against her long fingers, and she led him gently toward the circle of couples. The music quickened, a reel that stomped and laughed, but she slowed her steps to match his. She bent slightly, her eyes never leaving his, guiding him with the smallest of gestures. His boots stumbled once, twice, then found the rhythm. The world blurred around them, the clatter of feet, the laughter of neighbors. But her calm held him steady. At first, the whispers rose again. He felt them like needles against his back. But then something shifted. The way she moved, graceful, certain, yet careful to keep him with her, turned their dance into something no mockery could touch. Whispers softened, then fell away, replaced by quiet watching. When the song ended, breathless and bright, she held his hand high and gave a small bow, as though he had led her. A ripple of claps followed, surprising, genuine. Eli's face burned, but not with shame this time. They stepped aside, but she didn't release his hand. Not until he looked at her, and she saw the spark in his eyes. That night, walking back beneath the stars, Eli felt taller than he ever had. Autumn crept into the valley with gold in the trees and frost in the grass at dawn. The air grew sharp, and the work of harvest filled each day. Eli and she moved through it side by side, stacking hay, storing grain, preparing the cabin for winter. The land felt different now, no longer heavy with loneliness, but alive with shared effort. One evening, when the fields lay quiet and the sky burned red, she stood on the porch with her hands resting on the rail. Eli watched her from the doorway, tall, strong in her own grace, hair glowing in the sunset. She seemed carved from the very horizon. "I could leave come spring," she said at last, her voice calm. "Take the coach east, find a place where people would not stare so hard." The words struck him like a cold wind. He stepped closer, heart thudding, but said nothing. She turned her gaze to him, steady as ever. "But I have seen your hands on this land. I have seen how you face storms, how you stand in silence when others would shout. You think yourself small, Eli. Yet with you, I do not feel alone. That matters more than size." The knot in his chest broke then. He reached for her hand, so much larger than his own, and held it tight. His voice was low but clear. "Stay. This place is nothing without you." She studied him for a long moment, as if weighing truth against fear. Then she bent down, her forehead brushing his, and whispered, "Then I will stay." The evening settled around them, crickets rising with the dark. The farm stretched wide, fences mended, animals safe, a home steadier than it had ever been. Eli stood small against her towering frame, yet for the first time, he felt complete. Not diminished, not less, but equal, chosen. The valley would whisper still. Neighbors would stare. But here, on this land, they had made something the world could not measure. A partnership that defied the rules, a love stronger than doubt. And as the first stars lit the sky, Eli knew he was no longer the loner farmer of old. He was a man with a life worth guarding, because she had chosen to guard it with him.